we're going to start discussing international trade. So I put this after the international finance and balance of payments section because if you think about the last few slides from before, we're saying why trade deficits are not definitely a bad thing. And what we're going to talk about today are actually reasons why we think that international trade is a really good thing. And maybe we do run trade deficits or trade surpluses, but overall, the overarching lesson we're going to get out of the next few classes is international trade is really beneficial. So first I'm going to show some pictures and see if you can figure out what we have here. This is a company, this is pictures from a factory in the United States. Let's see if we can figure out what they're producing. Okay, start off here. Got this. Maybe now you're starting to guess it. We'll show one more. And this is a pencil factory. I show it because there was a famous essay called I Pencil that was written a long time ago, and it discusses how something as simple as a pencil requires inputs from around the world. So the essay starts by saying that I am just a simple pencil, but there is no one in the world who can make me, because someone in the world knows how to mine the graphite, and there's someone else who knows how to grow the trees, someone else who knows how to process the wood, someone else who knows how to take the wood, put a hole in it, and put the graphite through, someone else who knows how to come up with the paint, the rubber comes from somewhere else, and these come from all over the world, right? The place where there's a graphite mine is not going to be the place where you are able to find the rubber. Okay, and so you'll notice when you think about it is if all of our pencils had to be made using just US components, we would have much worse pencils. It'd be much harder for us to make a pencil. Maybe we would have to not have a eraser on the pencil or something like that. So look a little more closely at these benefits of international trade. So what's international trade? International trade occurs anytime someone buys something from another country. This includes Walmart buying clothes made in Bangladesh to sell in the United States, or Lufthansa buying a Boeing airplane to have flights in Europe. So here are some of the benefits. First benefit is more choices. So right now, the only minivan made by a US-based automobile company is made by Chrysler. So, and if we didn't have international trade, you could think about this idea that everyone who wanted a minivan would have to buy this minivan. However, because of free trade, we're able to buy Hondas and Toyota minivans. Those are companies based in Japan. This is a Kia minivan. It's based in South Korea. And so international trade gives consumers more choices. So whatever it is that is most important in a minivan to you, you can look at all four and decide which one you like. Another is access to resources. So this is an iPhone. This is the iPhone battery. If you've ever tried to change it, it's a huge pain in the neck. And one of the components in an iPhone battery is cobalt. Cobalt is hard to find. Almost all of the cobalt in the world is mined in the Congo. And so without being able to trade internationally, we would have a hard time finding batteries, and our iPhone batteries would be worse. They wouldn't last as long because cobalt is something that makes a better battery. Next, we have economies of scale. So we're going to keep on the idea of the iPhone. So this right here shows Apple's revenues by region. So the light blue here is the Americas, so North and South America. And we'll notice that, and you imagine the United States would be some smaller portion of that. And what we see is that the United States is really is less than half of Apple's revenue. And what that means is because Apple is selling iPhones all over the world, that means that they are able to get really good economies of scale. So if you think about developing the new iOS, so every so often, Apple releases a new iOS. Everyone immediately hates it because we're used to the old iOS. And this iOS is going to take a lot of effort for them to come out with new versions, right? A lot of software engineers spend their time. Well, you can imagine that if we're only selling a few iPhones, then you think about having to spread that cost of the new iOS over however many iPhones we're selling in the United States. Once they start selling them across the world, Now the iOS costs can be spread over more units. And this presumably allows for Apple to make more frequent updates to the iOS, spend more effort making a better iOS. The next benefit is increased competition. So this beautiful car here is a Chevy Cavalier, I think from 1984. Best-selling car in America. You can see why. This right here is an equally beautiful Toyota Corolla from around the same time. And in this period, 1984, 1985, there were quotas on how many cars could be imported to the United States from Japan. So American manufacturers wanted less competition from Japanese companies. So they got laws passed saying there was a limit to how many Japanese cars could come in. Well, this hurt consumers because it limited competition, right? With more Toyotas and Hondas available, that means General Motors has to make they feel more pressure to make the Chevrolet better and less expensive, right? Since they're having to compete. Well, there was a paper estimating that U.S. domestic car prices in 1984 and 1985 were between $750 and $1,000 higher because of trade restrictions. So essentially, because Chevrolet didn't have to compete as much with Toyotas because there weren't as many Toyotas available to be sold, Chevrolet charged a price that was $750 to $1,000 more than it would have in the presence of free competition. Next thing we're going to do is think about something we talked about a long time ago, which is comparative advantage. So remember this? We had this idea that what if LeBron James is better at both basketball and baking? Similar, we said, why is it that Martha Stewart doesn't do her own ironing? Why do NFL players iron movers? Why does The Rock have a stuntman? And the comparative advantage here, if you remember the definition, is the ability to produce a good at a lower relative opportunity cost than another producer. So if we think about LeBron James, why is he playing basketball and not running a bakery? Because he has a comparative advantage at playing basketball. If he were to opt to run a bakery, his opportunity cost, what he's giving up, is his $30 or $40 million a year he makes playing basketball. So he has a very high opportunity cost for baking, even though he's a good baker and can make money doing it. Next, we're going to think a little more about specialization, right? So we had this idea that LeBron should specialize in playing basketball, and someone else who's not good at basketball should specialize in running a bakery. And we had another example where we had an apple farmer and an orange farmer, and one of them should specialize in making apples, and one of them specialize in making oranges. Well, the idea holds whether the person who has the orange farm is located in Florida or Costa Rica. Either way, we think that each of them should specialize in what they do best. So let's think about this from an international perspective. So here we have a production possibility schedule for the United States and China. And we'll say that the United States could produce 4 airplanes and no iPhones, or if it only produces iPhones, it can produce 400 of them. If China only produces airplanes, it makes 2. If China produces only iPhones, it makes 300. So let's notice that the United States has what's called an absolute advantage in making both goods, right? If both countries only make airplanes, the United States makes more, 4 instead of 2. If both countries only make iPhones, the United States makes more, 400 instead of 300. Okay, so let's see, however, what the comparative advantages are. Well, comparative advantage, we need to figure out opportunity cost. So the USA would give up 400 iPhones to make 4 airplanes. Remember, if they're opting to make only iPhones and they decide they want to only make airplanes, they're going to have to give up 400 iPhones and they gain 4 airplanes. So give up 400 to make 4. That means there's an opportunity cost of 100 iPhones per airplane. China would give up 300 iPhones to make 2 airplanes, right? So if they move from this line here up to here, they've lost out on 300 iPhones, but gained 2 airplanes. So China gives up 300 iPhones to make 2 airplanes. That means there's an opportunity cost of 150 iPhones per airplane. And this suggests that because the United States has a lower opportunity cost for airplanes, giving up 100 iPhones instead of 150, the United States has a comparative advantage at making airplanes because they can make an airplane at a lower opportunity cost. That suggests that the USA should focus on making airplanes and China should focus on making iPhones. Because remember, everybody has a comparative advantage in one good. So if USA has a comparative advantage at making airplanes, China must have a comparative advantage at making iPhones. And this is an example of a Boeing airplane that's operated by China Airlines. Next, let's think a little more about trade and trade agreements, the terms of trade, so prices. Important thing I want to note is that every voluntary trade is mutually beneficial. So what I mean by that is you think about when you go to the grocery store, a lot of times you'll finish, you'll pay, the cashier will give you the receipt, and you'll say thank you, and they'll say thank you. The reason you both say thank you is because you believe that both of you think that you have benefited from this, right? The grocery store is benefited because they've gotten paid. You have benefited because you've taken your money and turned it into groceries, and you need groceries. So both of you are made better off. Every voluntary trade is mutually beneficial. We know this because in order for two people to agree to a trade, the trade must benefit both of them, right? So if you didn't think you were going to be made better off by groceries, you just want to go buy them, right? You would go shop somewhere else or buy something else instead of those groceries. The next thing we're going to show is how poor countries benefit from world trade. So this right here breaks all the countries up in the world into rich countries, which are in red, poor countries that are globalizers, so ones that work to have more international trade, and non-globalizers, which are ones that stay isolated and don't have a lot of world trade. And what you can see is that when we look at the growth through the 80s and 90s, the blue countries, the ones that were globalizers, had much higher growth in real GDP per capita. So the study found that for poor countries, if trade as a share of GDP increases by 20 percentage points, GDP growth grew by between 0.5 and 1 percentage point per year. If you remember from when we were learning about GDP, just a small change in the growth rate, so if you're going from 2% to 2.5%, compounded over time, that can have a huge impact on living standards. Let's look at another example of gains from trade. So 98% of clothing purchased in the United States is imported. That used to be way down at about 20%. So there's been a huge increase in how much of our clothes we import. And let's see what the effect of that is. So these are neat tables. The Bureau of Labor Statistics has essentially a sample average household budget going back over 100 years. So in 1901, what we can see is that the average American house spent about 14% of their income on what they call apparel and services. So apparel, clothing, I'm guessing services is probably like when you went to a cobbler to fix your broken shoes. Well, that number has gone down to 4.2% of income as of 2002. So what that means is that we now are spending 4% instead of 14%. Some of that is due to international trade. We are able to trade with other countries. Other countries have a comparative advantage at making clothing, and that allows the people in the United States to focus on what we have a comparative advantage in, maybe making airplanes or making wheat, things like that. And when we go from 14 to 4, that frees up an extra 10% of our income to go out to eat more, go on vacations, buy a car, things like that. Okay, so next class we are going to continue to discuss international.